I never imagined that the most painful words of my life would be uttered by a bank statement, and that the deepest betrayal would come from the hands of my own son. My name is Sarah Miller, and at 55, I thought I had built a solid life based on hard work and unconditional love for my family. But on a Tuesday morning, the castle of security I had built crumbled in an avalanche of numbers and debts. My credit card statement, which arrived in a discreet envelope, revealed a series of exorbitant transactions, online purchases on gambling sites, transfers to unknown accounts, ATM withdrawals at unusual hours. The total amount? A sum that far exceeded my life savings. My son, Michael, 28, was my pride. A charismatic, intelligent young man with a promising future, or so I believed. He had always been my safe harbor, the reason for every sacrifice, every extra hour at my job as a nurse. Now, the image I had of him shattered before my eyes, revealing an unknown, dark, addicted side. The pain of betrayal was a physical blow, a sharp pang in my chest that stole my breath. How could he do this? How could the son I raised with so much love and dedication be capable of dragging me into financial ruin, seemingly without a shred of remorse? My finances were in ruins, leaving me helpless and betrayed. The weight of his disappointment crushed my spirit. The house, the car, the retirement I planned for a peaceful old age, everything now seemed like a distant mirage, swallowed by a spiral of debt I couldn't comprehend. The initial shock gave way to a cold anger, a silent determination to understand what had happened and, more importantly, to seek some form of justice. I didn't know how or where to start, but one thing was certain: I would not bow down to this adversity. If you've ever felt the pain of betrayal, if you've ever seen your dreams crumble because of someone you trusted, then you understand what I'm feeling. Share this story, subscribe to the channel, and let's together uncover how a heartbroken mother found the strength to fight for her dignity. My life has always been a testament to dedication and sacrifice, especially when it came to Michael. Ever since his father left us when he was just 5 years old, I became his only rock, his pillar. I worked 2 jobs, often pulling all-nighters, to ensure he had everything he needed and a little more. I remember every sacrifice, the vacations I never took, the new clothes I put off buying to get him the books he wanted, the sleepless nights helping him with homework or taking him to soccer practice. I wanted Michael to have a full childhood and adolescence, without feeling the absence of a father, without the deprivations I myself had faced. He was always a good boy, or so I thought. He got good grades in school, was respectful to elders, had a seemingly healthy circle of friends. I encouraged him to pursue his dreams, to seek higher education. I paid for his college, one of the best universities in the state, even if it meant tightening my belt even further and working overtime to exhaustion. I saw every penny spent as an investment in his future, in his happiness. My greatest wish was to see him fulfilled, building his own life, his own family. I imagined myself a proud grandmother, enjoying the tranquility of a well-deserved retirement, reaping the fruits of all my efforts. Michael graduated in business administration, got a good job at a tech company in Los Angeles. I felt immense pride, a sense of duty fulfilled. He called me regularly, told me about his day, asked about mine. He seemed like the perfect son, the man I had molded with so much care and dedication. I never imagined that behind that facade of success and affection, an abyss of lies and addictions was forming. I never suspected that the money I had saved with so much sweat, that I had put aside for my security, was being drained to feed a destructive compulsion. The irony was cruel. I had sacrificed everything to give him a better life, and he was using that very life to destroy me. The disappointment was a heavy burden, but the incomprehension was even greater. How can a son do this to the mother who gave him everything? The first signs were subtle, almost imperceptible, like whispers in the wind that I, in my naivety, chose to ignore. Michael started asking for money more frequently. At first, they were small amounts, justified by unexpected expenses. The car broke down, rent was late, a friend's medical emergency. I, always willing to help my son, never questioned. My savings, which had once been a comfortable cushion, began to dwindle at an alarming rate. I worried, of course, but he always had a plausible explanation. A reassuring smile, a promise that everything would soon be all right. Then, the calls from the bank started. First, about overdue payments on accounts I didn't even know existed. Then, about maxed out credit limits. I called Michael, and he always downplayed the situation. "Mom, it's just a misunderstanding. I'm already taking care of it." Or, "It's system errors, don't worry." His voice, once so confident, now carried a tone of evasion, a rush to end the conversation. I felt a knot in my stomach, an intuition that something was very wrong, but the idea that my son could be lying to me was so absurd that I vehemently dismissed it. He started avoiding my visits to Los Angeles. Before, he would welcome me enthusiastically, show me around the city, we'd have dinner together. Now, there was always an excuse. "I'm too busy with work, Mom," or "My apartment's a mess. I don't want you to see it." The physical distance turned into emotional distance, and I felt increasingly isolated, confused. The excuses became more elaborate, the lies more transparent. I began to notice that he looked thinner, with deep dark circles under his eyes and a constant restlessness I had never seen before. That wasn't the Michael I knew, but I couldn't figure out what was happening. The truth, however, was approaching, and with it, the certainty that a mother's innocence can be the greatest vulnerability. The stack of bank statements and credit card bills on the kitchen table looked like an insurmountable mountain, each paper a reminder of the financial catastrophe that was befalling me. I had spent days reviewing every transaction, every withdrawal, every payment to online gambling sites. The initial denial had given way to a chilling certainty. Michael was responsible. The pain of discovery was excruciating, but the need to confront him was even more urgent. I arranged to meet him at a discreet cafe away from curious eyes, in a desperate attempt to maintain the dignity I still had left. When Michael arrived, his usual smile seemed forced, his eyes restless. He tried to hug me, but I pulled back, holding the folder with the documents like a shield. "We need to talk, Michael." My voice came out firmer than I expected. I placed the statements on the table, spreading them out like evidence of a crime. "Can you explain this to me?" I asked, pointing to the transactions. His smile vanished, replaced by an expression of shock, then anger. "Mom, what is this? Are you spying on me? This is an invasion of privacy." His attempt to deflect the focus deeply irritated me. "Invasion of privacy, Michael? And what did you do to my finances? To my life? Isn't that an invasion? That's destruction." He tried to deny, to argue, to blame the system, a bank error, even a hacker. But I was prepared. Every lie he uttered was confronted with a statement, a date, an amount. Gradually, his voice lost its strength, his eyes filled with a despair I had never seen. "Mom, I can explain," he began, but the words were lost in a sob. That was the moment I feared, the confirmation that the son I knew had been lost to an overwhelming addiction. The confrontation was painful, but necessary, and it left me with the certainty that the truth, however cruel, needed to be fully uncovered. Michael's partial confession, though painful, was not enough. He admitted to using the cards, but downplayed the extent of the problem, promising he would figure it out, and that it wasn't that serious. His attempt to reassure me only raised an even bigger red flag. I knew that to truly understand the depth of the hole we were in, I needed irrefutable proof, something that couldn't be denied or minimized. That day at the cafe marked the beginning of a relentless search, a lonely and exhausting journey to unearth the truth. I started with the banks. I spent hours on the phone, sending emails, and making in-person visits, requesting detailed transaction histories, statements from accounts I didn't even know Michael had opened in my name, credit reports. Every document that arrived was another stab, revealing the complex web of debts and manipulations he had woven. I discovered loans in my name, credit lines opened without my consent, even a mortgage on the house I thought was paid off. The shock was constant. With each new discovery, the feeling of betrayal deepened. My investigation didn't stop at the banks. I knew that online gambling was at the heart of the problem. I spent sleepless nights researching betting platforms, gambling addiction forums, trying to understand the dark world my son had become entangled in. With the help of a police friend, who advised me on legal limits, I managed to trace some of the transactions to specific sites. The irrefutable proof of his actions was materializing, not just in numbers, but in platform names, dates, and times that coincided with his money requests and his flimsy excuses. Every piece of paper, every line of code, every piece of evidence I collected was a step towards the truth, however devastating it might be. I was building a dossier not just to protect myself, but to force Michael to face the reality of his actions. With the complete dossier in hand, the truth was undeniable, brutal in its clarity. Michael had not just used my cards, he had squandered my savings, mortgaged my house, and plunged me into a debt that would take years to repay, if ever. The extent of his compulsion and manipulation was overwhelming. I had proof of every transaction, every loan, every lie. A mother's broken heart, a painful consequence, now transformed into a cold, unyielding determination. There was no more room for denial, for minimization, for the hope that he would figure it out. The decision was the hardest of my life, more than any sacrifice I had made for him. I had tried everything: conversations, pleas, veiled threats. But he kept lying, manipulating, sinking deeper. I realized that to save myself, and perhaps to give Michael a real chance to face his addiction, I needed a drastic measure. I needed him to feel the consequences of his actions in a way he had never felt before. With a heavy heart, but a clear mind, I sought out a lawyer specializing in financial crimes and a private detective. I presented all the evidence, every statement, every report. Their reaction was shock. "Ms. Miller," the lawyer said, "this is a clear case of fraud and embezzlement. The evidence is overwhelming." That was the end of the line. Not for me, but for the illusion that Michael could escape the consequences of his actions. I knew what was coming next would be devastating, but it was the only path to justice, to my own sanity, and paradoxically, to the possibility of a future for my son, even if that future began behind bars. The decision was made, and its weight was almost unbearable, but the conviction that it was the right thing to do gave me the strength to move forward. The decision to pursue legal action was the most painful, yet also the most liberating. With the dossier in hand, my lawyer, Mr. Thompson, filed the criminal complaint. The police began their investigation, and each step was a mix of relief and agony. I knew I was doing the right thing to protect myself and to force Michael to face the reality of his actions, but the image of my son being treated as a criminal tore me apart. With every call from the police, every statement, I relived the pain of betrayal, but I also felt the strength of my own resilience. The irrefutable proof of his actions was there, in every document, every record. The process was swift, given the clarity of the evidence. Michael was notified and, in a last act of desperation, tried to call me, pleading, promising to change, blaming his addiction, stress, anything to escape the consequences. But I had hardened my heart. Empty promises no longer fooled me. I needed actions, not words. And the action he needed was to face justice. The day of the arrest arrived. I received the news by phone, a formal voice on the other end informing me that Michael Miller had been detained on charges of fraud and embezzlement. The world seemed to stop. There were no shouts, no tears, just a heavy silence, a feeling of emptiness and, paradoxically, a chilling relief. My son, the boy I raised with so much love and sacrifice, was arrested for his crimes. The thumbnail headline came true, not as a desire for revenge, but as the painful consequence of destructive choices. It was the price of truth, the harsh reality that love, at times, needs to be accompanied by boundaries and justice. Michael's arrest was a shock to everyone who knew him, but for me, it was the beginning of a long and arduous healing process. The headlines in local newspapers and comments on social media were inevitable, but I shielded myself. My priority was to rebuild my life and, perhaps, one day, his. Mr. Thompson, my lawyer, worked tirelessly to mitigate the financial damage. We managed to renegotiate some debts, dispute others, and, over time, the mortgage on my house was reversed. The recovery would be slow, but it was possible. Michael, in turn, experienced the harsh reality of jail. The first few weeks were filled with denial and anger, but the lack of privileges, the rigid routine, and the solitude forced him to confront his addiction and his choices. I received letters from him, initially full of self-pity, then with a more genuine tone of remorse. He began attending support groups within the prison, seeking help for the gambling addiction that had consumed him. The physical distance, ironically, began to create space for a new, more honest, and less manipulative form of communication. For me, healing came in small doses. I went back to work, dedicating myself to my passion for nursing. I started attending a support group for families of addicts, where I met other mothers who had gone through similar pain. Sharing my story, listening to theirs, made me realize I wasn't alone. A mother's broken heart still ached, but the wound was beginning to heal. Justice had been served, not out of revenge, but out of necessity. It was the first step for Michael to, one day, find his own redemption, and for me to, finally, live in peace. 5 years have passed since that fateful day. Michael served his time, which included an intensive rehabilitation program for gambling addicts. His release from prison was discreet, without fanfare. I was there to meet him, not with the euphoria of a reunion, but with the caution of someone who knows the journey is still long. He was different, thinner, with a more mature look in his eyes and a humility I had never seen before. The addiction was still a daily battle, but he was committed to recovery. Our relationship was rebuilt brick by brick, with family therapy and a lot of patience. Michael got a job at a small company, starting from scratch. He dedicated himself to paying off his debts, mine, and those he had incurred. Every payment, however small, was a sign of his commitment. He became an advocate for gambling addiction awareness, sharing his story in support groups, warning others about the dangers of compulsion. My finances, though not fully recovered, were stable. The house was secure, and I had learned to value the simplicity and freedom that financial independence provided me. The pain of humiliation and betrayal would never completely disappear, but it had transformed into a scar, a reminder of my strength and my ability to overcome. Michael and I never returned to being the family we once were, but we became something stronger. A family that faced darkness and found a way back to the light, based on honesty, forgiveness, and unconditional love. Sarah Miller's story is a testament that, even in the most devastating situations, truth and justice can pave the way for healing. If you connected with this journey of pain, overcoming, and redemption, like this video, share it and subscribe to the channel for more stories that touch the soul and inspire life. Remember, a mother's love is unbreakable, but dignity is a treasure that must always be protected.